Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're going to start a new study today. We've been in the New Testament. We're going to go back to the Old, and we're going to look at the suffering servant passage in the book of Isaiah, Isaiah 40, verse 1 through chapter 56, verse 6. Now, if you look up the suffering servant passage in any of your reference books, they may end it a little earlier, a little later, but I think there's a pretty clear break after chapter 56, verse 6. But then again, the suffering servant passage is just woven so tightly into the entire book of Isaiah. So we need to talk a little bit about Isaiah for a minute. Isaiah, who was a young man at court, who was in the service of King Uzziah, seemingly as court historian, which we can gather from the text of his prophecy himself, found himself with a crisis when King Uzziah died. King Uzziah was a good king, but like Saul, tried to assume for himself roles of priest when it was not his role. God gave him leprosy, and he died. And so when the year that King Uzziah died, Isaiah, as he tells us in chapter 6, ends up in the tabernacle, or the temple, excuse me, ends up in the temple, and he comes face to face with God on his throne, with God's retinue there filling the temple. And God calls him to be a spokesman, to be a prophet. And it is the famous passage where he says, "Here am I, send me." And so that's what he does for the rest of his career. There's a question about whether there were others that he trained up that followed him and continued to add to his prophecy, and whether Isaiah, that we know from Kings Chronicles, from the book of Isaiah, whether that Isaiah wrote every word of all 66 chapters of this book. I don't know. I know it is a cohesive whole. Nobody disputes that. It is a cohesive whole, the book of Isaiah is. And it is an epic. And it was written during the age of people writing epics. It was written at about the same time the Iliad and the Odyssey were being put on paper in the 700s BC. And it is a salvation epic. It's about God's people, and it's about how God uses his people, the Israelites, to achieve salvation for all humanity. How they are like Joseph in Egypt. They are the ones that God has chosen to save others, through whom he will save the lot of us. And it describes that, and it starts with contemporary situation, the contemporary situation in Judah, the southern kingdom, through their Babylonian captivity. They're being set free to return by Cyrus the Persian. Cyrus is mentioned by name in the suffering servant passage. And chapter 66 ends with final judgment and the people being lost, burning in hell. I mean, that's the fire is not quenched and the worm dieth not. That's how the book ends. But it is a salvation epic, and despite the last verse, it is a book that is joyous in tone. Really is. It looks forward to the glorious days of the kingdom of the Messiah from chapter 2 on. It just does. And so the suffering servant passage, which is so specific about the coming of the Messiah, what it's going to be like, is really just part of the larger whole. It's kind of doing an injustice to the prophecy to lift it out. It's like taking a jewel out of its mount to look at the jewel. But sometimes you do that to see all the facets of it, and that's what we're going to be doing in the coming weeks. I thought of doing just messianic prophecies, but in Isaiah, but you can't just pull those out. You'd have to do the whole book. So we're going to stick to the suffering servant passage in this study. We are going to be visiting so many familiar passages. We just are going to be visiting so many familiar passages. What we're going to do next time we're together is I'm going to go chapter by chapter to give us kind of a preview of the themes and look at a theme verse. And then we'll start in chapter 40 and we'll look at verses 1 through 8. So thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes. We'll do a little bit of an overview next time. We'll see you then.